Today on Trucks, after months of cutting and fitting, welding and fabricating, the Harry Hauler's chassis is finally ready for its final assembly. Let's just say the cool factor is way high on this one. The cool factor continues when the guys take a close-up look at two-time NASCAR champion Jack Sprague's Chevy Silverado. Finally, we'll show you how to be prepared for the unexpected. That's all today on Trucks.
Welcome to this week's show, everybody. Glad you could join us. Now, if you've been following the build-up of the Harry Hauler, then you know a ton of work has gone into the transformation of our 34 International that was just a forgotten old relic when we found it, but it's going to be a one-of-a-kind hot rod when we're finished.
That's right. Now, anytime you do a build-up like this, well, it takes time. There's just no way around it. You have to cut and fit and weld and then refit and cut some more and custom build a bracket here and then put it all together just to have to take it apart 3 or 4 times. Now, we've showed you these tips and these techniques to show you that if you take your time, you really can build just about anything.
Now we come to the part of the build that's actually the most fun as well as rewarding, and that's when you get to put all the parts back on for good. That's right, no more mock-ups at this point. Now this is also where all that time you took making sure everything fits just right and being real meticulous about all your measurements really pays off.
Of course, the last thing we need to do before we can do the final assembly on the chassis is paint the frame. Now remember, the Harry Hauler is going to spend some time as a fully fendered rod as well as fenderless. So these frame sides, as well as from this body mount forward, needs to be really slick. So we spent some time with a grinder getting everything nice and smooth. Then we hit it with a good coat of epoxy primer surfacer to take out any kind of imperfections. Then we hit it with a coat of raspberry pearl from House of Colors and then covered that with a nice thick coat of clear. You can see the results are spectacular.
And it's only going to get better when we put our polished stainless steel A-arms and steel spindles we got from Height's Hot Rod Shop back on. Now make sure to put some grease on the bushings to keep them from squeaking, and it's always important to use anti-seize on stainless steel bolts.
With the coilover shocks in place, it's time for the hubs, rotors, and calipers. Now for those, we went to Willwood and got these really trick polished aluminum pieces. Now with the hubs and rotors in place, go ahead and bolt on the caliper. But make sure that you use some Loctite on the caliper bolts and the hub bolts to keep it from backing out. Now once that's done, you're ready for your wheels.
Now the last thing we need to bolt onto our front suspension is this rack and pinion unit we also got from Height's, and it's going to be held in place with supplied stainless steel hardware. Now whatever you do, take the time to paint these tie rod ends, otherwise they're going to stick out like a sore thumb on an otherwise flawless front suspension.
Now it's time to assemble the rear suspension. Of course, we painted this 9-inch Curry rear end to match the frame. That makes that poly center section really pop. Now we'll just jack it up here into place. Then we put on our stainless steel 4 bars, followed by the pannered bar, and then finally the coilover shocks. Now we'll make the final adjustments on our pinion angle once we have the drive shaft in.
With the rear housing fully mounted, we were able to slide our rear axles back into place. Now the rear brakes are also polished Willwoods, and they're very similar to the ones we're going to run in front, except for one thing, and that's these little parking brakes here that mount right onto the caliper bracket. Now once we have our rotors and calipers back on, we'll be ready for those big old rear tires.
The last thing we're going to put on the rear end are these wheelie bars. And you didn't think we'd forget those, did you? Now they just bolt up to the brackets that we welded to the rear end. Now keep in mind that this rear end is empty, so we're going to fill it with some Royal Purple synthetic gear lube. Keep those gears happy for a long time.
Now we're ready to put our stainless steel lines back on, and since we already did all the bending, cutting, and flaring before Stace laid down that killer looking raspberry paint on the frame, now all we have to do is put them back in their proper place. By the way, this is the perfect time to hit them with a good polish to really bring out that shine.
While Mel's taking care of the brake lines, I went ahead and put on the fuel lines, the fuel pump, and the fuel filter. Now, since our holes are already drilled and tapped, it's just a matter of bolting everything on. Now, you're probably wondering where we got these cool chrome-plated 12-point bolts that we're putting everything on with, because they're expensive and they're kind of hard to find if you don't know where to look. Well, here's a trick. We got them all in a Mr. Gasket engine detailing kit. Now this gives you a complete assortment of chrome-plated bolts that are about half the price than if you buy them all separate.
Now, with the brake lines in place and ready to go, it's time to put on our brake booster and master cylinder. Now, the master cylinder is bare metal, so make sure you hit it with a good rust-prohibitive paint. After that, go ahead and bolt it all in place and follow that up with your clutch master cylinder.
With the master cylinder in place, we can go ahead and make the final connections to the lines. Now, as you can see, our stoplight switch and the residual valves are in line where they need to be. And the good thing about having the master cylinder down in the frame like this is that once you have everything tight, you can go ahead and bleed the brakes and you're ready to go.
Speaking of brakes, we really need to take one, but don't go away. We got more trucks for you right after this. Here's that wrench, man.
All right, thanks.
This is looking very cool.
Oh, it's almost too nice to put a body on.
Pretty much. I was thinking maybe just a seat.
That's crossed my mind now.
Later on Trucks, we've got a Silverado to show you that can push 200 miles an hour at Daytona. Jack Sprague's NASCAR Craftsman Series truck is coming up after we finish up the chassis on the Harry Hauler.
Welcome back to Trucks. Now, with all of our suspension components bolted to the frame, all we have left to do is bolt in the drivetrain. Make sure you keep a lot of rags handy because you're going to be doing a lot of polishing on something like this. Now, you may have noticed that we painted our bell housing the same color as the rest of the frame. This gives us a nice splash of color between all this polished aluminum on the engine and on the transmission. Now all we have left to do is finish up some of the details like the scoop and the alternator and this exhaust system.
You know, one of the main problems on an older truck like our 34 International is that the stock radiator is never going to keep a modern V8 cooled down. That's why we went to Evans Cooling and got this custom Griffin aluminum radiator that's going to fit inside of our stock shell. We're also going to run Evans waterless coolant to help keep temperatures down as well.
With the radiator mounted in the grill shell, you can see that we decided to keep this original top opening because it's so stinking cool. Matter of fact, that's what real hot rods are all about. And you'll also notice we still have plenty of room to come in here and mount a Flexolite electric cooling fan to keep everything cool.
Now for the radiator and heater hose, we're going to use this Cool Flex hose from Total Performance. And this stuff's really the only way to go because all you have to do is cut it and bend it to shape and you have a really cool custom hose that won't ever wear out on you.
All right. Now we've talked a lot about how we're going to run the hauler both with and without fenders. Of course, this brings up a real interesting problem, and that is headlights. Now, with the fenders in place, the stock headlights are supported by these braces that run under the fenders. Of course, we're going to reuse those. But with the fenders off, as you can see, well, that doesn't look any good. So what are we going to do? Well, we thought you'd never ask. We went to SoCal Speed Shop and got a set of these really cool polished stainless steel pedestals that mount right on the frame on either side of the grill shell, highboy style. Now to mount these, all you have to do is drill and tap your holes, which we've already done, and then just bolt them on.
Of course, we couldn't put just any old lights on those pedestals. We knew we had to have something really special for the look and style we're after. Fortunately for us, we didn't have to look any further than Total Performance for a pair of their chrome-plated King B lamps. Now these things not only match our pedestals perfectly, but they also give us that really cool look we just had to have.
Well, that takes care of the chassis assembly for now. Man, it's nice when things go together like that and you can stay fairly clean. But now it's time to get dirty again because we've still got some work to do here in the cab, and that involves everybody's favorite subject, wiring and electrical.
You know, the reason most people don't like messing with wiring is because for the longest time there were no kits available to help you out. Of course, that was before Painless Wiring offered up this complete kit to take the pain out of that process. Now this kit comes with all the fittings, fuses, wiring, and hookups you'll need to get up and running. Here's that harness, Stace.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
Now, installing your harness is pretty much like anything else. You need to spend some time mapping it out so you know how it's going to lay. Now, the more time you spend here, the less time you'll have to spend later on fixing your mistakes. Now, we're going to mount our fuse panel up on the firewall behind the steering column where it's out of the way, but we still have access to it. Then we'll run our wires down the side and under the cab as neatly and out of the way as possible.
Obviously, we had to have some new gauges for the hauler, so we went to Stuart Warner and grabbed a set of their wings gauges. Now, these have that vintage look we're after with their white faces, classic pointer, and of course the little wings logo, but they're a whole lot more than just another pretty face. They're also loaded with state-of-the-art electronics to keep up with that blown motor.
Now, where you mount your gauges is entirely up to you and your own personal preference. Now, on a vehicle like the old 34 that's got two great big holes already cut in the dash, well, you have a couple choices. You can make some patch panels, weld them in, grind it all down, and then cut your holes for your new gauges. Or if you don't want to do that, that's a lot of work. You can make a cover plate out of nice wood or polished aluminum or stainless steel, put it up there, cut your holes in the plate and the dash, and mount your gauges. Now, either way, done right, will be awesome.
Well, speaking of awesome, we thought we'd give you one good look at how well everything fits together. From the rear axle to the drive shaft, the brake lines and steel braided fuel lines, to the transmission and motor, all the way down into the front suspension, as well as the wheel and tire combination. Let's just put it this way. With a chassis that looks this good, you can count on a one-of-a-kind hot rod when we're finished.
Up next on Trucks, the guys have a few things to show you that should always be with you before you leave the driveway.
Screwdrivers to a knife blade.
Just can't get enough of trucks? Check us out online at truckstv.com.
Thanks for staying with us, everybody. You know, when you're out on the road or even the trail, situations can come up that you're really not prepared for. And you might think being prepared for those very situations means carrying a big old box of tools and equipment. Well, the fact is that's not only impractical, but it's really not necessary either.
That's right. So we're going to show you a list of things that everybody should carry in their truck. First off is this amazing stuff known as duct tape. Now, the trick to duct tape is that it's very sticky and very strong. You can use this stuff to tape up sagging headliners, broken windows, use it to make emergency repairs on hoses. Heck, I've even seen guys hold on fenders and bumpers with this stuff. Now here's a trick. Keep the tape in a plastic bag so all the adhesive that oozes out around the sides won't get all over everything.
Next up is a simple pad of paper. Why, you ask? Well, come on. How many times have you dug through your glove box trying to find something to write with? Having these two items allows you to take down information if you're in a wreck, record license numbers and locations if you happen to witness a crime, even jot down directions and phone numbers if you end up lost. Now, this may seem obvious, but most people never even think to carry this pair.
Now we have what most people call the miracle tool, and that is the vice grip. Now these things literally take the place of a vise, a pair of pliers, a whole set of sockets and wrenches, even a hammer. Now, you can use these things to reconnect broken suspension parts, body panels, even exhaust systems. We definitely recommend having the biggest pair that'll fit in your truck because the bigger ones are a lot stronger than little dinky ones.
Now, the next thing you want to look into is a good flashlight. And the trick here is to get one that's small so it doesn't take up a lot of storage space, but still has a good strong beam. Now, these are great for looking under a hood or into a trunk at night, and they're a whole lot more versatile as well as more safe than something like a flare.
Now, as far as tools go, having a good multi-tool like this Leatherman is a definite must. Now, these have everything from a pair of pliers to screwdrivers to a knife blade. Seriously, between this and the vice grips, there's very few things that you won't be able to handle. Now, when you're looking for a multi-tool, make sure you get something pretty sturdy and has its own case.
Now, the next thing you don't want to be without is a fire extinguisher. Now, chances are you're never going to need one of these things, but if you ever do, you're really going to be glad you have one. Of course, you want it to be small so it's easy to store, but you also need to make sure that it'll handle all types of fires, especially electrical and fuel fires.
Finally, a flat tire comes along at the worst possible times, usually on a dark street with no shoulder. So you need a can of Fix-A-Flat. Now, this not only seals most flat tires, but it also inflates the tire for you, lets you get someplace safe. But keep in mind, Fix-A-Flat is only temporary. You need to get somewhere and get the tire fixed properly as soon as you can.
Well, there you have it, a few simple things everyone should have with them before they leave their driveway.
There's no doubt that when it comes to high-performance hoses, using braided stainless steel is the only way to go. It's far superior to a stock rubber hose. However, that doesn't mean that it lasts forever. The rubber hose inside the braiding will eventually deteriorate and start to leak on you, but the hose will still look new because of the braiding, and that can create a potentially dangerous situation. So, when do you change the hoses? Well, on a street application, if your hoses are around 10 years old, it's time to replace them. Hey, who drooled on the scoop? Welcome back to Trucks. You know, there's a lot of forms of racing out there, and for the longest time, the majority of the vehicles that were whipping around the tracks across the country were cars. Well, that changed in 1995 when the Craftsman Truck Series was born.
And the only driver that runs in that series that started every race is two-time NASCAR champion Jack Sprague. Today, we're going to take a close-up look at his Silverado.
Now, this racing Silverado sits on a 7-inch shorter wheelbase than stock, and the roof line is 10 inches shorter than what comes off the assembly line. All the body panels are lightweight aluminum. Of course, there's no glass in the truck, including the headlights, which are nothing more than very realistic looking stickers.
Now the cockpit is all business with its racing seat and harness, and since this bow tie doesn't have any doors, a quick release steering wheel makes it easier to get in and out. A complete roll cage protects Jack when any of those racing deals come up, and a large rear view mirror allows him to keep an eye on the competition.
Under the hood sits a 358 small block Chevy that's been massaged to kick out about 750 horses. Of course, that's backed up with a 4-speed manual. Now, the racing front suspension is all open and easy to get to, so making adjustments for various track conditions is a snap.
Now, since we're on the subject of suspension, this chassis was built by Hendrick Motorsports on the same jig that Jeff Gordon's Winston Cup Monte Carlo is built on. Now, on a super speedway like Daytona or Talladega, this truck can run in excess of 190 miles an hour, thanks in large part to these Goodyear racing slicks.
Surprisingly enough, there is something that vaguely resembles a bed in back under this little panel. But you can forget about cargo. All this thing hauls is a 22-gallon fuel cell that feeds a very thirsty motor, 104 octane racing fuel.
Well, maybe now you have a better idea of exactly what goes into a NASCAR Craftsman truck, and nobody does it better than Chevrolet, winning more than 50% of all the races run since the first checkered flag dropped in '95.
And now truck gear, parts, tools, and equipment for pickups and sport utilities.
Now, if you're into off-roading, you know that airing your tires up and down is something that you've got to do to get maximum traction. Well, Extreme Outback Products has made that a lot easier with their Extreme Air Compressor and Tank Kit that they claim is the fastest, highest pressure, continuous duty compressor on the market. And you can mount this thing in any position on your truck, and the cooling fan keeps the compressor from overheating and shutting down on you. So that way you can not only air up your big tires, but everybody else's too. Now, the whole kit goes for about $380, and Extreme Outback is who has it.
You know, when the PT Cruiser first came onto the scene, a whole lot of people couldn't help but sit up and take notice. And hey, why not? They resemble an old surfer's wagon, except for one thing. That's right, no wood. Well, PT Cruisin' took care of that omission with their Woody kit. Now, these panels are made of plastic so they won't deteriorate in the weather, but you'd be real hard-pressed to tell these aren't real wood. The best part about this kit, however, is how well everything fits around the door handles and emblems, and installation only takes a couple hours in your driveway. That's going to do it for Truck Gear. Here's a preview of next week's show.
we'll take a 99 Sierra and give it a few things every outdoor rig should have. Then we'll show you the latest on Project Big Blaze before bolting on a heavy-duty bumper and winch combination. After that, we'll take you on a tour of duty with one of the ultimate British war machines. All that plus a little fun with the cab of the Harry Hauler. That's right, we'll show you how to replace those rusty panels.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. We appreciate you hanging out with us.
Yeah, we got more trucks for you next week.
Very cool.
Check this out.
Oh, man. Oh, those are beautiful.
So you can't just have one set of valve covers, you gotta have two.
Oh, I see, like the fender.
Or
Some
three.
days we'll have a fender, okay.
Depends on the weather and the mood.
Trucks is an RTM production.